What would you do if you discovered your husband had been stealing millions from you while telling you that you couldn't afford furniture for your baby's nursery? Sarah was 7 months pregnant when her husband shoved her in the middle of a crowded bank lobby. But that push, that single act of cruelty, was about to expose a web of lies so massive it would change her life forever. Because the bank manager who witnessed everything, he recognized something in Sarah's face. Something that made him go pale. Something connected to a secret her father had buried for over 20 years. Sarah wasn't just a struggling, middle-class wife. She was the hidden heir to a $2.7 trillion fortune. But here's the terrifying part. Her husband already knew, and his two previous wives, one committed suicide, the other simply vanished. Now Sarah has to escape a man who has killed before, while carrying his child, while discovering a family she never knew existed. This is the story of how one woman's worst nightmare became her greatest awakening, lesson and value. Before we begin, here's what this story will teach you. Sometimes the most painful moment of your life is exactly what you need to discover who you truly are. Financial abuse is real, and recognizing the signs could save your life. Stay until the end. Because Sarah's transformation will show you that your worth is never determined by someone who tries to control you. The sharp click of high heels on marble was the only sound in the quiet lobby of Metropolitan Trust Bank. Sarah Mitchell shifted the strap of her purse on her shoulder, placing her other hand over her 6-month pregnant stomach in a protective gesture. Ahead of her, the platinum banking area was a world of polished brass and rich mahogany, a clear signal of old money and exclusive service. The security guard stepped forward and said, "Excuse me, miss, but this section is reserved for our premium clients." His voice was polite but firm, the kind used for saying the same thing many times a day. Sarah stopped, a warm blush creeping up her neck. "I am here to see the manager about the business accounts of my husband, Richard Mitchell of TechFlow Dynamics." The guard's entire demeanor changed in an instant. "Oh, Mr. Mitchell, of course. Please come this way, ma'am." Sarah's thoughts were racing as she followed the guard toward the executive wing. Her perfect life had been shattered 3 weeks ago. That was when she found out that Richard, the man she had been married to for 8 years, was hiding a fortune from her. He had been telling her they did not have enough money for new furniture in the baby's room, but he was secretly managing several business accounts she had never known about. She discovered it all by mistake. She had needed the password for his laptop to buy some groceries because her phone battery was dead. That was when she found the bank statements in his email, records of deposits and transfers so large they made her feel dizzy. For years, her husband had lied, claiming they were barely getting by on his substantial salary. "Mrs. Mitchell," the guard's voice pulled her back to the present. "The manager's office is right through there. Are you certain you do not want to wait for your husband?" Just then, the main doors of the bank flew open with a bang. The force of the doors swinging open caused several customers to jump and look over. Richard Mitchell marched across the marble floor toward her. His expensive suit was perfectly fitted, and his jaw was clenched in a way that Sarah knew meant trouble. "Sarah?" His voice was a sharp command that cut through the lobby's quiet atmosphere. "What in the world are you doing here?" Everyone in the bank turned to look at them. Sarah could feel her face getting hot with a mix of shame and a new rising anger. "I am trying to figure out why you said we could not afford nursery furniture when you have 3 different business accounts I have never even heard of." Richard closed the distance between them in 3 long steps, his large frame looming over her. At 6'2", he was taller than almost everyone, a fact he often used to intimidate people. You have no business looking into my private financial matters. Your private financial matters? Sarah's voice grew louder, even though she tried to keep it down. We are married, Richard. We are supposed to be a team. Keep your voice down, Richard hissed, shooting a quick look at the people, now openly staring at them. You are making a scene. I am making a scene? The words escaped her, much louder than she had wanted. You are the one who has been lying about our money for years, and you think I am the one causing embarrassment. Do not tell me what to do. Richard's voice was like the crack of a whip in the silent lobby. Richard, please, not here. We are in a public place. Can we not just... I said do not tell me what to do. The motion was so quick that Sarah barely saw it coming. Richard's hand slammed against her shoulder, shoving her backward with shocking force. Her pregnant frame was already unsteady, and she stumbled. She reached out and grabbed a marble pillar to keep from falling, her heart pounding in her chest from the near fall. It was also pounding from the pure shock of what he had done. Her husband had just shoved her, in public, while she was carrying their child. Is there a problem here? The voice that broke the tense silence was deep and carried a natural authority. It was the kind of voice that made everyone else in the lobby immediately go quiet. Sarah looked up and saw a man walking out of the executive offices. He was tall with silver hair and wore a charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than a small car. James Wellington was the manager of the Platinum Division at Metropolitan Trust Bank, and in his 15 years there, he had never witnessed a scene quite like this one. When his eyes met Sarah's, a strange look passed over his face. It might have been recognition, or maybe it was confusion. There was something familiar about her that made his heart feel tight with an old, forgotten emotion. There is no problem at all, Richard said, his tone immediately changing to the smooth, professional one he reserved for his clients. This is just a little domestic misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Sarah looked at her husband, unable to believe what she was hearing. You pushed me. I hardly touched you, Richard snapped back. You are being overly dramatic, just like always. James Wellington moved closer, his sharp eyes assessing the entire situation. He saw the pregnant woman clutching a pillar for support, the angry, red-faced man in the expensive suit, and the audience of customers trying to look away. After 15 years in his line of work, he had learned to read people very well, and this whole scene was screaming that something was very wrong. I believe it would be best if we continued this discussion in my office, James said. His tone was a calm suggestion, but the look in his eyes made it clear it was an order. All of us? Richard's confidence began to crack. He had obviously not expected the bank manager to step in. That is not necessary. We are about to leave. Actually, Sarah spoke up, her own voice surprising her with its strength. I came here for a purpose. I would like to speak with you, Mr. Wellington, about my husband's accounts. Sarah? Richard said her name as a low, dangerous warning. No, Richard, I am finished with pretending that everything is okay when it is not. James observed the exchange with a mix of professional concern and personal curiosity. This woman, Sarah, showed incredible courage, even though she was clearly shaken, and there was still that nagging feeling about her, something he just could not place. Mrs. Mitchell, James said in a careful, calm voice, why do you not come into my office? I am confident we can get this sorted out. As he led the way to the executive offices, James could not help but study Sarah's face from the side. The curve of her nose, the set of her jaw, her posture, so dignified even while pregnant and under extreme stress. It all stirred a memory that was just out of his reach. 3 hours later, Sarah was sitting in her car in the bank's parking lot. Her hands were trembling as she thought about what the manager had told her. James Wellington had been professional and kind, and he had been surprisingly understanding. He told her that he could not legally share specific details of the accounts, but he did confirm that Richard had several business accounts with very large balances. But that was not the reason her hands were shaking. It was the strange look on James's face when she had told him her maiden name while filling out some forms. His face had turned pale, and he had asked in a hesitant voice, "Was your mother's name Elizabeth Wellington by any chance?" How on earth could this stranger know her mother's name? Sarah considered the question that had been haunting her for weeks, ever since she found out about Richard's secret finances. What do you do when you find out the person you promised to spend your life with is a complete stranger? What happens when you learn that your entire life is a lie? As she turned the key in the ignition, Sarah came to a firm decision. She would find out exactly who James Wellington was, and she would learn why hearing her mother's name made him look as if he had just seen a ghost. She had a strong feeling that this awful, confusing, and life-altering day was only the beginning. The rain that had been threatening to fall all day finally started, and each drop on her windshield felt like one of the tears she was trying so hard to hold back. Her phone buzzed, and the car's screen showed a call from her sister, Emma. "Hello, Em," Sarah answered, doing her best to sound normal. "Sarah, what is wrong? You sound terrible." Emma had always been able to tell how her older sister was feeling, even over the phone. "Richard pushed me at the bank today. He did it in front of a whole crowd of people." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Emma finally spoke, her voice was cold with fury. "He did what?" "Sarah, that is against the law, especially while you are pregnant. Please tell me you called the police." "I did not call the police." Sarah pulled into her driveway and saw that Richard was not home yet. But something else happened. Something really weird. "What do you mean, weird?" Sarah shut off the car's engine and sat in the quiet darkness of her garage. "The bank manager, James Wellington, when I told him Mom's maiden name for some paperwork, he looked like he saw a ghost, Em. I think he knew Mom." "That is not possible," Emma said right away. "You remember what Dad told us after Mom passed away. He said her family disowned her and wanted nothing to do with us. They blamed him for stealing her away from their wealth and their high society life." Sarah had grown up hearing that same story over and over. Their father, David Mitchell, was a middle-class insurance agent who met and fell in love with Elizabeth Wellington at a charity event in Boston. He always said that Elizabeth's rich family cut her off completely when she chose to marry him, a man they considered beneath her. After she died of cancer when Sarah was 12 and Emma was 9, they refused to have any contact with her daughters. "But what if Dad was not telling the whole truth?" Sarah asked. "What if there is another side to the story?" At that same moment, 15 miles away, James Wellington sat in his corner office at Metropolitan Trust Bank. A phone call was about to change everything for James Wellington. He dialed a familiar number. "Marcus, it is James. I need a complete background check on a person." "Yes, it is urgent." For more than 10 years, Marcus Rodriguez had served as James's private investigator, taking care of everything from corporate investigations to personal security for the bank's most important clients. "What is the name?" Marcus asked. "Richard Mitchell, the Chief Executive Officer of TechFlow Dynamics. But I am more concerned about his wife, Sarah. Her maiden name was Sarah Catherine Wellington." "Wellington, is she related to you?" James looked at a photograph on his desk. It was a faded picture of him and his sister Elizabeth from her wedding day 25 years ago. Elizabeth looked stunning in her simple white gown, holding the hand of a man James had never trusted. David Mitchell had appeared pleasant enough, but something about him had always given James a bad feeling. Perhaps it was how quickly he had charmed Elizabeth. or how he seemed so eager to move her away from her family in Boston. "It is possible," James replied softly. "Send me everything you find. I want her family history, financial documents, and any medical records you can legally obtain. I have to know if this woman is who I believe she is." After ending the call, James unlocked a desk drawer and took out a small wooden box he had not touched in years. Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue, was a delicate gold locket. It was engraved with the Wellington family crest. He had purchased it many years ago for Elizabeth's daughter, a gift for a niece he was sure he would never get to meet. Meanwhile, in her kitchen, Sarah was having a similar conversation with Emma. Her sister had driven over the moment she heard what happened at the bank. "You never mention Mom's side of the family," Emma said as she placed 2 cups of tea on the table. "It might be time to start looking into it." "You know exactly why I do not talk about them," Sarah answered. "After Mom passed away when we were young, Dad told us her family wanted nothing to do with us. He claimed they held him responsible for taking her away from their wealth. But what if he was not telling the truth?" The question lingered in the air. Emma had always been the more skeptical sister, the one who challenged authority and investigated when things seemed off. Sarah was the peacemaker, always accepting what she was told and trying to see the best in situations. "Why would Dad lie about that?" Sarah questioned. Perhaps he was ashamed. Emma proposed, "Just think about it, Sarah. Mom was from a wealthy family, right? A very wealthy family. What if they offered to help after she died, and Dad was too proud to take their money? What if he made them stay away because he did not want to be seen as a charity project?" Sarah thought about this possibility. Their father had always been a man of great pride, sometimes to his own detriment. He had worked 2 jobs to raise them in a nice neighborhood after their mother's death, never accepting help from anyone. She had always looked up to his independence, but now she wondered if there was a darker aspect to it. "There is only one way to know for sure," Emma stated. "You have to return to that bank and speak with James Wellington. If he knew your mother, he might have some answers." That evening, while Sarah was getting ready for a quiet night alone, her phone rang. It was a number she did not recognize. "Mrs. Mitchell, my name is James Wellington from Metropolitan Trust Bank. I think we should talk." Sarah's heart started to pound. "Is this about my husband's accounts? I do not know what else there is to say." "Not about your husband's accounts," James said cautiously, "but about yours." "Mine? I do not have any accounts with your bank." "Mrs. Mitchell, would it be possible for us to meet tomorrow morning? We have some family business to discuss, things that concern your mother." Sarah held the phone more tightly. "My mother has been gone for more than 20 years. What could you possibly know about our family? Your mother was Elizabeth Wellington, correct?" The question struck Sarah with the force of a physical blow. "How did you know that? Who are you?" "I am someone who has been searching for you for a very long time," James said in a gentle voice. "Please, Mrs. Mitchell, just give me 1 hour of your time tomorrow morning. I am certain you will want to hear what I have to tell you." After she hung up, Sarah sat alone in her house. Richard still had not come home after the incident at the bank. For the first time in a very long time, she let herself truly think about her mother. Elizabeth Wellington Mitchell was a beautiful, kind, and incredibly intelligent woman. She could speak 3 different languages, played the piano like a professional, and had a gift for making everyone feel important. But she was also very private about her life before she got married. Sarah remembered asking about her grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, but she always received vague responses. "My family is a bit complicated, honey," Elizabeth used to say. "Sometimes it is better to concentrate on the family you create, rather than the family you are born with." Now, sitting alone in her dark kitchen, Sarah wondered if her mother had been trying to shield her daughters from something or someone. Right on cue, Richard's car appeared in the driveway. Sarah heard his heavy steps on the porch, the sound of his key turning in the lock, and she prepared herself for the inevitable argument. "We have to talk," Richard said the moment he stepped inside. "Yes," Sarah replied. "We certainly do." Richard's voice boomed through the house as he walked toward the kitchen where Sarah was waiting. His footsteps were heavy and deliberate, filled with anger. She knew the conversation ahead would not be pleasant. "You made me look like a fool today," Richard said bluntly, loosening his tie as he walked into the kitchen. "Do you have any idea the damage you have done to my reputation?" "Your reputation?" Sarah said, keeping her voice calm. "You physically pushed your pregnant wife in public, and you are worried about your reputation. I barely even touched you. You are overreacting like you always do." Richard went to the refrigerator, grabbed a beer, and opened it with unnecessary force. "But that is not the issue here. The issue is that you went behind my back to get into my business accounts." "Our accounts, Richard. We are married." "No, Sarah. They are my accounts for my business. You have no legal claim to them, and you definitely have no right to embarrass me in front of my banker." Sarah watched her husband drink his beer. She noticed the way his jaw tightened when he was mad and how his eyes avoided hers when he was being dishonest. After 8 years of marriage, she had learned to recognize these signals, but she had spent most of those years finding excuses for his behavior. "Richard, I saw the bank statements on your laptop. I know all about the accounts. I know we are not having the financial problems you have been telling me about." Richard slammed his beer down on the counter, making Sarah jump. "You went through my personal computer? I was just trying to order groceries because my phone battery died. I needed the password for the app, and I noticed your email was open. The bank statements were right there. So you decided to start spying on me? I decided I wanted to know why my husband has been lying to me about our finances while I am using coupons and buying baby clothes at secondhand stores." A heavy silence filled the room, thick with 8 years of unspoken anger and lies. Sarah had always known Richard was controlling with money, but she had always justified it as him being a smart businessman. Chief executive officers are careful with their money, she had told herself. They make plans for the future. They manage their assets well. Now she was starting to see that what she had seen as financial prudence was, in fact, financial abuse. "You do not understand how business works, Sarah," Richard finally said. "Those accounts are for very complex deals and managing cash flow. It would all be too confusing for you. Try me." "What? Try me?" "Explain it. I have a degree in mathematics, Richard. I am pretty sure I can figure out where our money is going." Richard's face changed, and for a second Sarah saw a look in his eyes that sent a shiver of fear down her spine. "You need to let this go, Sarah. You have to apologize for what you did today, and you need to promise me you will stay away from that bank. Or what will happen? Or there will be consequences." The menace in his words filled the space between them like a poison. Sarah felt her baby kick, as if it could sense her racing heart, and she put a protective hand on her stomach. "Are you making a threat, Richard? I am protecting this family. Someone has to." Before Sarah could say anything else, her phone rang. The screen showed the same unknown number from earlier. "Do not pick that up," Richard ordered, but Sarah ignored him and answered the call. "Hello? Mrs. Mitchell, this is James Wellington. I am sorry to call so late, but I have been looking into some things since we spoke, and I think this situation is more serious than I first realized." "What kind of situation?" Sarah asked, fully aware of Richard standing close by, his whole body stiff with rage. "I would rather not get into it on the phone. Can we meet tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock? "I do not think that is a good idea," Sarah said, looking at Richard's face, which was now a frightening shade of red. "Mrs. Mitchell, I know you are hesitant, but I have information about your mother's family that I strongly believe you should hear. Information regarding your inheritance. My what? Your inheritance, Mrs. Mitchell. I have reason to believe you are the rightful heir to a very large family estate that you have never been told about. Sarah's knees suddenly felt weak. She collapsed into a kitchen chair, her free hand still resting on her pregnant stomach. That cannot be true. My mother's family cut her off when she married my father. Mrs. Mitchell, if I may say so, I think you have been told a very inaccurate version of your family's history. Your mother was my sister, and we have been searching for you for over 20 years. The phone fell from Sarah's hand, clattering against the kitchen table. Richard acted fast, snatching the device before Sarah had a chance to move. This is Richard Mitchell, he stated into the phone, his tone sharp and businesslike. My wife is pregnant and overly emotional, so she is not able to make clear decisions right now. I would appreciate it if you stopped bothering her with whatever trick you are trying to pull. Mr. Mitchell, James's voice was perfectly clear, even from a few feet away. I can promise you this is no trick. I am a licensed banker and a part of the Wellington family. Your wife is my niece. That is impossible, Richard replied. But Sarah could detect the doubt entering his voice. Mr. Mitchell, I possess official documents, family pictures, and legal confirmation of our relationship. I also have some worries about your wife's financial standing that require our discussion. Richard hung up the phone and spun around to Sarah, who was looking at him with a mix of disbelief and dawning clarity. He is a liar, Richard insisted. It is obviously some kind of con, likely from someone who found out about my business success and believes they can fool us out of our money. But Sarah was recalling memories. The distant look that would come into her mother's eyes when she spoke of Boston, the valuable jewelry that had vanished without a trace after her mother passed away. Pieces her father said had simply been lost. The way her mother seemed to possess knowledge about art, music, and high culture that never matched the simple, middle-class life they led. What if he is telling the truth? Sarah asked in a low voice. Think clearly. If your mother was truly from a wealthy family, do you not think we would have been aware of it? Do you not think they would have reached out after she passed away? Perhaps they did try, Sarah countered, as the puzzle pieces started to connect. Perhaps Dad never told us. Your father would never have hidden something that important from you, would he not? Sarah rose to her feet, confronting her husband from across the kitchen. The same way you would not hide financial details from me? Richard's face turned red with rage. That is entirely different. Is it? You have been dishonest with me about our finances for years, Richard. You made me think we were barely getting by while you were stashing away thousands of dollars in bank accounts I knew nothing about. Why would I trust your opinion on what my own father might have concealed from me? Because I am your husband, Richard yelled. Because I am the father of your baby. Because every single thing I do is for the protection of our family. By deceiving me? By handling matters you think I should not worry about? Sarah gazed at her husband, truly seeing him, and for the first time in 8 years, she understood who he was. The need for control, the manipulation, the pattern of making her feel unintelligent and insignificant any time she dared to question him. This was her reality. This was the life she had come to see as normal. I am calling him back, she declared. No, you are not. Yes, I am, and I plan to meet with him in the morning. Sarah, if you follow through with that call, if you attend that meeting, there are going to be consequences. I am serious. Sarah retrieved her phone and looked her husband in the eye. Richard, I do not believe you get it. I am no longer concerned with your consequences. As she looked through her call history for James Wellington's number, Sarah understood that for the first time in many years, her husband's anger did not scare her. Her curiosity about the truth was far stronger than any fear. And that single realization felt more freeing than anything she had experienced in a very long time. The following morning, Sarah was seated opposite James Wellington in his office, paneled with mahogany, her hands clutching a coffee cup that was now cold. The bright morning sun poured through the high windows, bathing the room in a golden light that made the entire experience feel unreal. "You look just like her," James remarked quietly, observing Sarah's face with the focus of someone committing a cherished image to memory. "Like who?" "Like your mother, Elizabeth, my sister." Sarah's coffee cup clinked against its saucer as she put it down. "Your sister? That cannot be possible. My mother's family wanted nothing to do with her after she married my father." James Wellington was a well-dressed man in his early 60s with silver hair and gentle eyes that showed fine lines at the corners when he smiled. He was not smiling at that moment. His face held a look of profound sorrow, mixed with what looked like regret. "Is that the story your father told you?" James asked in a soft voice. "Sarah, we looked for Elizabeth for years after she vanished. We hired private detectives, offered cash rewards, and checked on every Elizabeth Mitchell in the nation. We believe she had passed away. She did pass away. From cancer, when I was 12. I am aware. We discovered it 3 years too late." James slid open a desk drawer and took out a thick manila folder filled with papers. "We were finally able to locate her death certificate in 2010. At that point, both you and your sister had already left your father's home. We had no method to locate you." Sarah felt as though the floor was disappearing from under her. Every story she had been told about her mother's family, every reason she had accepted for their modest lifestyle, could have been a complete fabrication. "Why would my father claim that you disowned her?" she questioned. "I truly have no idea," James replied. "Elizabeth left Boston without warning, right after she married your father. She would not return our calls or answer our letters. We could only assume David had persuaded her to sever her connections with us. Maybe he believed you did not approve of him." "We did have our reservations at first," James conceded. "David appeared to be a decent man, but Elizabeth was positioned to inherit a very large part of the Wellington family fortune. We worried that his motives for marrying her might have been financial." "And were you correct?" James remained silent for a considerable time. "I cannot say for sure. What I can say is that Elizabeth was due a trust fund valued at roughly $250 million at the time of her death. That inheritance was supposed to pass directly to her children." Sarah let out a laugh that had no joy in it. "I am sorry, did you say $250 million? That was the value in 2003. After calculating compound interest and investment returns, your inheritance today is valued at approximately $2.7 trillion. Trillion?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "That is not real. The Wellington family has specialized in shipping, real estate, and technology ventures for 4 generations." James clarified with patience. "We were among the first to invest in several companies that grew to be incredibly successful. Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon. Your great-grandfather possessed a unique ability to spot technologies with great potential." Sarah shot up from her chair, walking over to the window that offered a view of the city's skyline. This had to be an error of some kind, or a very detailed prank. People like her did not suddenly inherit trillions of dollars. People like her used coupons at the grocery store and stressed about affording furniture for a new baby. "I need evidence," she said, her back still to him. "I need to see the paperwork." "Of course." James took out another folder and laid out several documents on his desk. Birth certificates, a family chart. We can even do genetic testing, if you wish, and photos going all the way back to your mother's childhood. Sarah returned to the desk and began to examine the papers. There it was, her mother's birth certificate, listing her name as Elizabeth Catherine Wellington, born in Boston, Massachusetts. A family chart detailed the Wellington family history back to the 1800s, and there were pictures, dozens of them, of a young woman who looked identical to Sarah, attending family functions, charity galas, and elegant dinners. "This is actually her," Sarah whispered. She picked up a photograph of Elizabeth at what looked like a university graduation. "She looks so joyful." "She was a genius," James said with obvious pride. "She graduated with highest honors from Harvard, holding degrees in both mathematics and computer science. She developed algorithms that our company continues to use in its investment models." "Mom studied computer science?" Sarah looked at him, completely surprised. "I had no idea. She never once brought it up." "It seems there's a great deal your father chose not to tell you about your mother's life before she met him." Sarah collapsed back into her chair, feeling the weight of everything she was discovering. Her mother was not just a housewife who passed away too soon. She had been a gifted mathematician and computer scientist from one of the most affluent families in America. "James," she began carefully, "if all of this is accurate, if this inheritance truly belongs to me, then there is something you must know about my husband." "What is it about him?" "Yesterday, when I went to the bank to inquire about his accounts, he actually pushed me in front of everyone. And last night, after you called, he made threats against me." James's friendly demeanor vanished. "What kind of threats?" "He warned me that there would be consequences if I came to this meeting today." "Sarah, there is something else I have to share with you. Following our talk yesterday, I asked my investigators to examine your husband's personal history. Richard Mitchell has been systematically taking and spending a monthly allowance from your trust fund." "What are you talking about?" "When you and Richard married, he became eligible for a spousal allowance from your inheritance. For 8 long years, $50,000 had disappeared every single month." The thought made Sarah feel sick to her stomach. $50,000 a month. Her husband had been taking and hiding almost $5 million of their family's money, while at the same time telling her they were too broke for baby furniture. The room felt like it was tilting as the enormity of Richard's lies crashed down on her. He had not just concealed his income from his business. He had been hiding her own inheritance, money that belonged to her, money that could have given them a completely different life. "He told me we were struggling just to get by," she whispered in disbelief. "Sarah, your husband is a financial predator," her Uncle James said softly, "and I do not think he is working by himself." "What are you talking about?" James paused for a moment before opening another file. "Our investigation shows that Richard has a history of doing this. He has done it twice before. He seeks out women from wealthy families, marries them, and then gets control of their finances. And after that, he cuts them off from their relatives." "There were other wives?" Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her pregnant stomach. "What happened to them?" "His first wife was named Margaret Thornton. She took her own life after he emptied her trust fund. The second wife, Patricia Carlyle, simply vanished. Her family is convinced she is dead, but they never found a body." Sarah felt a crushing weight on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The man she married, the man whose child she was carrying, was very possibly a murderer. "Sarah, I believe you are in far more danger than we first thought," James said gently, "especially now that you are aware of your inheritance." "The baby," Sarah whispered. "He has been insisting the baby take his last name and that he be named the primary parent on all the birth records. If anything were to happen to you during or after you give birth, and Richard had sole custody of your child, he would gain control of your entire inheritance as the baby's legal guardian." The chilling implication hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. Richard was not just stealing from her current trust account. He was setting himself up to inherit absolutely everything if she were to die. And considering what happened to his previous wives, Her death would likely not be an accident. I have to get away from him, Sarah declared, pushing herself to her feet. I have to leave. Not just yet, James said with a firm tone. If you just disappear, Richard will know for sure that you have discovered the truth. We have to be smart about this. We need a plan to protect both you and the baby. So, what is the plan? First, we are going to move your inheritance into new accounts that only you can get to. Next, we will collect all the proof of Richard's fraud and abuse. And then, we are going to make certain he can never harm anyone again. Sarah looked at her uncle and felt a glimmer of something she had not felt in years. Hope. For the first time since learning about Richard's betrayal, she felt like she did not have to face this by herself. Where do we begin? She asked. James gave her a warm smile, and in it, Sarah saw the same kindness her mother used to have. We begin by getting you to a safe place, and then we will introduce you to the rest of your family. When Sarah got back to her house that afternoon, she found Richard waiting for her in the living room. A pile of legal documents was spread neatly across the coffee table. He was wearing his most expensive suit, the one he saved for critical business meetings, and his face had a carefully neutral expression that always set Sarah on edge. "Hello, darling," he said, not even glancing up from the papers. "We need to have a little talk." Sarah put her purse and keys on the entry table, noticing that Richard had placed himself directly between her and the front door. It was a subtle move meant to intimidate her, a tactic she now clearly understood. "What are all those papers?" she asked, pointing toward the documents. "Just some things to make our lives a little easier," Richard replied, finally looking at her with a smile that never reached his eyes. A financial power of attorney, an updated will, and the custody agreement for the baby. A cold dread washed over Sarah. These were the exact documents James had warned her about. "Richard, we have not even talked about any of these things. The baby is not due for another 3 months. We are talking about them now." Richard stood up and walked toward her, making sure to stay between her and the only way out. "It is obvious you are not capable of managing our money responsibly, especially after that little scene you caused at the bank yesterday. So I will be taking full control from now on." "I am not signing any of it," Sarah stated, taking a step back toward the kitchen. Richard's perfectly composed expression began to crack. "Yes, you are." "No, Richard, I am not." "Sarah, you seem to have forgotten a few very important details." Richard followed her into the kitchen, his voice dripping with the condescending tone she had come to despise. "You are 7 months pregnant with my baby. You do not have a job, you do not have any income, and you have no family to help you. You need me." The lies flowed from his mouth so easily that for a split second, Sarah almost believed him. 3 hours ago, she would have, but not anymore. "Actually, Richard, I do have family, and they have resources you could not possibly dream of." Richard's look of absolute confidence finally wavered. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the Wellington family. Have you ever heard of them?" The blood drained from Richard's face so fast that Sarah thought he was going to collapse. "That is not possible. You told me your mother's family cut her off. I was mistaken, and you were mistaken when you thought you could steal from them." Richard's mask of self-control shattered completely, revealing the furious, cornered man he truly was. "You have no idea what you are saying." "Oh, do I not? I know about the $50,000 a month you have been stealing from my inheritance. I know about Margaret Thornton and Patricia Carlyle. I know everything about your sick pattern of marrying women for their wealth and then completely destroying their lives." Richard's face went from ghostly white to a deep, angry red. "Who told you all of that?" "My Uncle James. You might remember him from the bank yesterday. He is the manager you tried so hard to bully." "Your uncle?" Richard's voice trembled slightly. "Sarah, whatever he told you, It is all lies. They are just trying to poison you against me. The same way you poisoned me against my own family with your lies for the last 8 years. Richard snatched the stack of papers from the coffee table and marched to the front door. This is not finished, Sarah. You have no clue who you are messing with. Oh, it is finished. And I know exactly who I am dealing with. I am dealing with a man who married me for a fortune he never thought I would find out about. Richard stopped at the door, his hand gripping the knob. You think you are so clever now, do you not? You think your high and mighty, rich family will just swoop in and rescue you? I think I am finally seeing things clearly for the first time in 8 years. Well, let me make one thing crystal clear for you, darling. Richard's voice dropped to a terrifying whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. You are carrying my son. That gives me certain legal rights. And if you believe, for 1 second, you can just leave me because you stumbled upon some family money, you are in for a very rude awakening. Get out, Richard. This is my house now, too. Get out of here before I call the police. Richard just stared at her for a long, tense moment. Sarah saw something in his eyes that filled her with terror. It was the look of a desperate, cornered animal, a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. You are going to regret this, Sarah. I can promise you that. As soon as Richard was gone, Sarah called James. He knows, she said the moment he picked up the phone. He knows I spoke with you, and he knows about the money. James, I think he is truly dangerous. Where are you right now? I am at home, but I do not think I should be here anymore. You are right. Pack a small bag with enough for a couple of days. I am having a car come get you. Where am I going? To the family estate. It is about time you met the rest of the Wellingtons. 20 minutes later, while Sarah was frantically throwing clothes and toiletries into a suitcase, she heard a car pull up the driveway. But it was not the car James had arranged. It was Richard's BMW, and he was not by himself. Looking through the bedroom window, Sarah saw two large men get out the passenger side. They were dressed in expensive suits and looked like they could be bodyguards or something much worse. Her phone rang. It was James. Sarah, the car I arranged should be pulling up any second. Richard is here, Sarah whispered, backing away from the window. He has two other men with him. I think they are here to make me sign those papers. Go into the bathroom and lock the door. Do not come out for any reason until you hear police sirens. You called the police? I called them the moment you told me he made threats against you. They should be there in just a few minutes. Sarah could hear the front door being forced open downstairs. Then she heard heavy footsteps and Richard's voice shouting her name. She grabbed her packed bag and ran into the master bathroom, slamming the lock into place just as she heard someone reach the top of the stairs. Sarah! Richard's voice boomed through the house. Do not make this any more difficult than it has to be. We just need to have a quick conversation. Sarah huddled on the bathroom floor, her hand placed protectively over her baby bump. She thought about how drastically her entire life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, she was a lonely, pregnant wife, married to a controlling man she believed she loved. Today, she was a wealthy heiress, on the run from a husband who was probably planning to kill her. Then she heard the sirens. They started as a faint sound in the distance, but they were growing louder with every passing second. From behind the locked bathroom door, Sarah heard shouting from downstairs. Then, the front door slammed shut. The police finally broke through the door to check on her, but Richard and his friends were already gone. They left something behind that sent a chill down her spine. Lying on her bed, right next to her open suitcase, were the legal papers Richard had been pushing her to sign. Only now, they were filled out, and her signature had been forged. Detective Rodriguez spoke to her softly. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, we have evidence of financial fraud, identity theft, and a history of domestic abuse that covers 3 different marriages. Your uncle gave us a lot of documents. What happens next? Sarah asked. Now, the detective replied, we ensure your husband can never harm you, or anyone else, ever again. Sarah watched the police cars leave, carrying away bags filled with the forged papers. And Richard's financial records. Sarah understood she was truly free. She was free from all the lies, the manipulation, and the constant fear. More than anything, she was free to find out who she was, after so many years of being told she was weak. That journey was only just starting. The Wellington family's property covered 200 acres of beautiful Hudson Valley land. A Georgian-style mansion stood among perfectly kept gardens, looking like it was straight out of a storybook. As their car drove up the winding driveway, Sarah looked out the window. She could not believe this incredible place had anything to do with her family. This was your mother's home, James said quietly from beside her. She rode her horse in those fields every single morning before school. In the distance, Sarah saw horses eating grass, their coats shining in the sun. She never told me she rode horses. She never mentioned any of this at all. Elizabeth had a real way with animals, James explained. She won quite a few riding competitions in college. He pointed toward a smaller building you could see through the trees. That is the stable where she kept her horse, Midnight. After she left, we let him live out his days in the pasture. He made it to be 32 years old. We buried him right over there, under that big oak tree. The car pulled up to the mansion's front door, where a man and a woman stood waiting. Sarah knew who they were from the pictures James showed her. They were her cousins, David and Margaret. David Wellington walked right up to her as she stepped out of the car. His friendly smile made her feel comfortable right away. He was in his early 40s, with light brown hair and smile lines near his eyes. He could have been an actor if he was not in charge of Wellington Holdings on the West Coast. Elizabeth always talked about wanting to have daughters one day, David said. He gave Sarah a soft hug, careful of her pregnant stomach. She would have been incredibly proud of you. Margaret Wellington was quieter, but just as friendly. She was tall and graceful, with a touch of silver in her dark hair. She had a powerful presence, the kind that earns respect in business meetings anywhere. We have your mother's old room ready for you, Margaret said. Her voice was sharp but gentle. I hope you find it comfortable while we deal with this mess with your husband. Walking through the grand entrance hall, Sarah felt completely in awe of everything around her. Crystal chandeliers hung from high, painted ceilings. Valuable paintings decorated the walls, and beautiful Persian rugs lay on perfectly polished floors. It can be a bit overwhelming, James said, seeing the look on her face. Your mother thought so too when she first got back from college. She always said the house felt more like a museum, until she filled it with her laughter. They went up a wide, curving staircase to the second floor. There, James opened a door to a bedroom filled with sunlight that was absolutely stunning. The room was painted in gentle shades of blue and yellow. It had French doors that opened onto a private balcony with a view of the gardens. This was Elizabeth's room from when she was 12 until she went to college, Margaret told her. We left it just the way she had it. Sarah moved slowly through the room. She looked at all the little things that told a story about the mother she never got to know. One wall was covered in bookshelves, packed with books about math, computers, literature, and art. A small grand piano stood by the windows with sheet music for a Chopin piece still open. She was a wonderful piano player, David said, noticing where Sarah was looking. She would play for the whole family every Christmas Eve. On a small table, there were family photos Sarah had never seen before. There were pictures of her mother laughing with her friends, getting awards at school, on horseback, and playing with little cousins who were now the adults standing with her. There is something I want you to see, James said. He opened a door to an office connected to the bedroom. This is where your mother worked on her computer programming. The office was full of high-tech equipment that seemed light years ahead of its time. There were several computer screens, powerful processors, and other devices Sarah did not even recognize. Elizabeth created trading programs that still make money for the family's foundation today, Margaret said. Her work with artificial intelligence was groundbreaking back then. She was creating financial models that were 20 years more advanced than what anyone else was doing. David continued, if she were still alive, she would have completely transformed the world of financial technology. Sarah slowly sat down in the chair at her mother's desk. She traced her fingers along the keyboard of a computer so advanced she never dreamed her mother could have owned it. Why did not she ever tell me about any of this? Sarah wondered out loud. Perhaps she was going to, James said kindly. Maybe she just believed she had more time. A quiet knock on the door broke the silence. Margaret's assistant stood there, looking worried. I apologize for interrupting, she said, but something has happened. Richard Mitchell just attempted to get into Sarah's main trust fund. When the bank refused him, she continued, he got very angry and threatened the bank employees. James's face grew stern. What exactly did he threaten? He told the bank teller that the Wellington family would be sorry if they thought they could take his wife and his child from him. He claimed he had connections they were not aware of and methods to get what he considered his. Sarah felt the baby kick inside her, as if sensing her sudden anxiety. He is not going to stop, is he? No, James answered, his voice low and serious. Men like Richard never just walk away. When they feel trapped, they become more dangerous. Margaret walked over to the window, a pensive look on her face. We have to be ready for him to do something reckless. What are you talking about? Sarah asked. What I mean, David said, is that Richard Mitchell has already had 2 other wives who died under very strange circumstances. Now he is about to lose all his money and go to jail. Men in his position will do anything. As if they had spoken his name and called him forth, Sarah's phone started to ring. Richard's name flashed on the screen, and the room went completely quiet. Do not answer that, James warned. Actually, Sarah said, surprising them all, I think I need to. I want to hear what he has to say for himself. She picked up the phone and turned on the speaker for everyone to hear. Sarah, my love, I have been so worried about you. Richard's voice was slick and full of fake worry, the same voice he always used to control her. Where are you? I am in a safe place, Richard. A very safe place. Sarah? You are 7 months pregnant. You belong at home so I can look after you. You mean the same way you looked after Margaret Thornton and Patricia Carlyle? For a few moments, there was nothing but dead air on the line. When Richard finally spoke, all the fake kindness was gone from his voice. I see they have been feeding you a lot of nonsense. Is it nonsense, Richard? Did Margaret Thornton really kill herself right after you emptied her bank account? And did Patricia Carlyle just vanish into thin air after she tried to get away from you? Sarah, they are playing you. These people just want to use you for your inheritance. Why can you not see that? The only one who has ever used me for money is you, Richard. Everything I did to keep our family safe. By taking $5 million that belonged to me, by faking my name on official papers, by telling me you would take my child from me. At that, Richard's polite act shattered. That baby belongs to me too, Sarah, and I will take what is mine. Every last bit of it. The only thing you are going to take is a long trip to prison. We will see about that. Richard's voice lowered to a frightening whisper that made everyone in the room freeze. Do you really believe your new, rich family can keep you safe? Do you think they can stop me from getting to my own child? You do not know what I can do. And then the call ended. James was instantly on the phone with his security people. Margaret called the family's lawyers. David stood watch at the window, his eyes scanning the property, like a guard expecting an attack. "He is coming for her tonight," David said, his voice grim. "I have a bad feeling about this." Sarah put both hands on her stomach. She felt her daughter give a powerful kick, as if she also knew they were in danger. "What are we going to do?" Sarah asked. "We are going to protect you and this baby," James said with determination, "no matter what." As the sun went down behind the Wellington estate, Sarah knew that her new life, with all its money and family, also brought new kinds of threats. But for the first time in 8 long years, she did not have to face those threats by herself. That single choice changed everything. At 2 in the morning, the piercing sound of the estate's security alarms shattered the silence. Sarah woke with a start in her mother's old room. Her hand flew to her pregnant belly as she struggled to get her bearings. She could see the beams of flashlights cutting through the darkness of the gardens outside her balcony's French doors. Her phone buzzed instantly. It was James. He said, "Sarah, lock yourself in the room and keep away from the windows. We've got several intruders on the grounds." She asked if it was Richard. James confirmed. "Almost certainly. Our security team is on it, but I need you to get into your mother's old safe room. Do you see the bookshelf on the left side of the piano?" Sarah's eyes scanned the moonlit room. "Find the volume of Shakespeare's sonnets on the 3rd shelf from the top. It has a blue leather cover. Pull on it." Sarah located the book and gave it a tug. She watched in astonishment as an entire section of the bookshelf swung open, uncovering a secret room. "That was put in during the Cold War," James explained, while Sarah stepped inside the hidden area. "Your mother used to go in there when she got into trouble." He added, "There's a phone, some water, and a direct line to the police." The safe room was much bigger than Sarah had imagined. It had comfortable chairs, emergency supplies, and monitors displaying feeds from all the security cameras. On the screens, she saw shadowy figures dressed in black moving stealthily toward the main house. "I can see at least 6 men," Sarah told James over the secure phone. "Richard brought a team, but so did we," James replied. On the screens, Sarah saw the estate's security personnel completely surround the intruders. A tense standoff began that dragged on for nearly an hour. Richard's men tried to force their way into the mansion, but the Wellington security team managed to hold them back without resorting to violence. At 3:15 in the morning, the main lights of the estate suddenly blazed to life, flooding the grounds and leaving the intruders exposed. Sarah could now see Richard perfectly. He was standing near the front door, holding what looked like a weapon. James's voice boomed from a loudspeaker across the property. "Richard Mitchell, you are trespassing on private property. If you leave right now, we might consider not pressing charges." "I want my wife," Richard yelled back. "And I want my child. You can't keep them from me." "Your wife is here because she wants to be," James's voice replied. "And she has requested that you stay away. She has been brainwashed. She has no idea what she is doing." From inside the safe room, Sarah pushed a button that activated the external speaker system. Her voice echoed across the grounds, filled with unexpected power. "Richard, I know exactly what I'm doing. I found out about the money you were stealing. I found out about Margaret and Patricia. I know who you really are." Richard's voice broke with panic. "Sarah, you are making a huge mistake. These people do not care about you. All they want is to control you." "The only one who has been controlling me is you," Sarah replied. "I am your husband. I love you." "You do not love me, Richard. You only love what you thought you could get from me." The standoff continued for another 20 minutes. Richard switched between begging and making threats, while the security team held their ground. On the monitors, Sarah saw the flashing red and blue lights of police cars arriving on the estate grounds. Detective Rodriguez got out and raised a megaphone. "Richard Mitchell, you are under arrest for trespassing, domestic violence, financial fraud, and conspiracy. Drop your weapon and step forward with your hands where I can see them." "This is just a misunderstanding," Richard yelled. "They are holding my pregnant wife here against her will." "Sir, we have already spoken with your wife," the detective announced. "She is here by her own choice and has asked for police protection from you." What happened next sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Instead of giving up, Richard lifted his weapon. He did not aim it at the police, but at the mansion windows, where he imagined Sarah was hiding. "If I cannot have her, then nobody can," he screamed. The police reacted instantly and with precision. In a matter of seconds, Richard was on the ground. His weapon was kicked out of reach, and his hands were secured behind his back with zip ties. His partners gave up without any more trouble. After the police cars drove away with Richard and his crew, Sarah finally left the safe room. She found James, David, and Margaret waiting for her in the hall. "Is it over?" she asked them. "The immediate threat is gone," James confirmed. "But Richard will likely face federal charges for his financial crimes, plus attempted assault charges for what he did tonight. He is not getting out of prison for a very long time." Sarah collapsed into a nearby chair, suddenly overcome with exhaustion. "I cannot believe I was married to someone who could do something like this." "Predators are masters of disguise," Margaret said softly. "It is not your fault that you were unable to see what he was hiding." "So, what happens next?" Sarah asked. "Now, you concentrate on having a healthy baby," David said with a warm smile. "And we will focus on teaching you everything you need to know about being a Wellington." 3 months later, Sarah delivered a healthy, beautiful baby girl in the estate's own private medical wing. While holding baby Elizabeth, who was named after her grandmother, Sarah could not help but think about how dramatically her life had changed. "She has your mother's eyes," James said quietly, looking down at his great-niece. "And I bet she has her grandmother's stubbornness, too," Margaret added with a chuckle. Sarah looked at the family that had gathered in the room, a family she never knew she had. There was James, David, Margaret, and a few other cousins who had all come to meet the newest member of the Wellington family. For the very first time, she felt completely safe and unconditionally loved. "What do you think, Elizabeth?" Sarah whispered to her baby. "Are you ready to learn all about your family's empire?" Baby Elizabeth let out a big yawn and snuggled deeper into her mother's arms, almost as if she was saying she was ready for any adventure that came her way. And Sarah knew, with certainty, that the two of them could face anything together. 6 weeks after Elizabeth was born, Sarah stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the Wellington Foundation's headquarters in Manhattan, with her daughter sleeping soundly in her arms. The city spread out beneath them, a powerful symbol of human drive and success that her family had helped build for 4 generations. "This building was bought by your great-grandfather back in 1943, James explained, as he came to stand beside Sarah at the window. "Back then, everyone thought he was insane for investing so much in Manhattan property." "Why did he do it?" Sarah asked, gently swaying as Elizabeth started to stir. "He had vision," James said. "He could see opportunities that nobody else could." He then pointed towards the busy streets far below. "Wellington Holdings currently owns 47 buildings in Manhattan alone, not to mention major properties in London, Tokyo, and Dubai." Margaret walked over, holding a tablet that displayed financial documents that would have been completely baffling to Sarah just a few months prior. But now, after weeks of intense lessons about her family's business empire, she was finally starting to grasp the true scale of her inheritance. "Your own personal trust fund brings in about $50 million a year in passive income," Margaret clarified, But that is only the beginning. The family foundation manages assets valued at over $400 billion. $400 billion? Sarah echoed, her mind still trying to wrap around such an enormous figure. Your mother's algorithms by themselves have produced over $60 billion in profit since she passed away, David added, walking into the office, carrying a pile of new proposals. We have been using that money to finance clean water projects in developing nations. We also fund scholarship programs for students from low-income backgrounds and support medical research. Sarah moved toward her mother's portrait, which was displayed in a prominent spot in the foundation's main conference room. Elizabeth Wellington Mitchell seemed to smile down at her, and her eyes had the same warmth that baby Elizabeth had inherited. She would have completely transformed the entire tech industry if she had lived, Sarah said quietly. She still did, James responded. She did it through her work, through you, and now through your daughter. A legacy is not just about what we achieve in our own lifetime. It is about the possibilities we create for the generations that follow us. In the weeks that followed, Sarah dove into learning every single detail of the Wellington Empire. She analyzed financial statements, sat in on board meetings, and met with the foundation's program managers to see firsthand how their fortune was being used to make lives better all over the world. We are not just wealthy people who spend money, Margaret explained to her during one of their afternoon lessons. We are caretakers of resources that have the power to change the world. Every investment we make, every charitable gift we give, and every business partnership we form has the ability to affect millions of lives. Sarah discovered that Wellington Holdings had been one of the first to invest in renewable energy companies, which were now at the forefront of the battle against climate change. The foundation funded educational programs that had already lifted over 200,000 students out of poverty and into professional careers. Their medical research grants had helped develop treatments for cancer, Alzheimer's, and rare genetic diseases. This is what your mother wanted to be a part of, James told Sarah one evening while they were looking over proposals for new foundation projects. She always believed that wealth without a purpose was completely meaningless. What will happen to my daughter? Sarah asked, her gaze fixed on Elizabeth, who was happily playing with a teething toy. What kind of future can she possibly have in the middle of all this? That really depends on how you choose to raise her, David responded with a thoughtful tone. Wealth can be an incredible gift or a heavy burden. It has the power to give a person the freedom to change the world for the better, or it can completely cut them off from reality. How can I guarantee it becomes a gift? You do that by teaching her that with great privilege comes great responsibility, Margaret explained. You show her that the advantages she has are not just for her own gain, but to serve everyone she is in a position to help. Over the following months, Sarah started to find her footing in the family business. Her background in mathematics, paired with the knowledge she was gaining about her mother's work, proved to be a huge asset to the Foundation's Technology Investment Division. You possess your mother's natural talent for spotting groundbreaking new ideas, James commented after Sarah had pinpointed a small startup that would eventually grow into a billion-dollar enterprise. It is almost as if you inherited her special formula for seeing into the future. Exactly 1 year after learning about her true family history, Sarah was invited to speak at the Foundation's yearly board meeting. As she faced the board of directors, which included industry leaders, Nobel laureates, and prominent social activists, she deeply felt the importance of her family's legacy and her personal duty to continue it. A year ago, I believed I was just an ordinary person, Sarah started her speech. I was an expecting mother, married to a man who viewed me as nothing more than a tool for his own purposes. I had no clue that I was part of a family committed to using its resources to empower other people. She scanned the room, seeing the faces that had grown so familiar individuals who had accepted her not merely as an heiress, but as a collaborator in their shared goal to make the world a better place. Today, I am here to propose a new project, the Elizabeth Wellington Initiative for Women's Financial Independence. Sarah advanced to the first slide of her presentation, which displayed shocking statistics on financial abuse and domestic situations, causing several board members to audibly gasp. Each year, countless thousands of women feel stuck in abusive situations simply because they do not have the money to get out safely. They remain with partners who harm them, take their money, and dictate their lives because they feel they have no alternative. A profound silence filled the room as Sarah spoke on. We are going to put an end to that. My proposal is that we designate $100 million every year to offer free legal help, temporary housing, financial literacy programs, and startup funds for women who are escaping abusive partners. A board member, Dr. Patricia Chen, lifted her hand to ask a question. What gives you the confidence that you can achieve success when so many other groups have not? We have an advantage that those other organizations do not, Sarah answered. We possess the means to offer complete long-term assistance. The majority of domestic violence support systems can only provide short-term shelter and basic counseling services. We can provide that and also offer job training, access to education, legal support, and the initial capital for them to start their own small businesses. We can build a complete pathway that guides women from a state of crisis to self-sufficiency and finally to empowerment, Sarah went on. And after that, we can show them how to help other women achieve the same thing. The board's vote to greenlight the initiative was unanimous. Just 6 months later, the Elizabeth Wellington Initiative had already assisted more than 3,000 women in leaving abusive homes and starting over. The initiative delivered everything from urgent emergency aid to long-range career support, achieving a success rate that surpassed even what Sarah had hoped for. Your mother would be incredibly proud of you, James said to Sarah while they looked over the initiative's first yearly report. She was a firm believer that the most important benefit of having wealth was the power to create opportunities for other people. Sarah looked down at her baby, Elizabeth, who was now 1 year old and already displaying flashes of her grandmother's sharp mind and strong will. As Sarah observed her little girl stacking blocks, building them up, and then knocking them down just to begin again, she envisioned a future filled with limitless potential. Do you know what I believe, Elizabeth? Sarah whispered to her daughter. I believe your great-grandmother would have been brilliant at this work, and I am certain you will be even more amazing at it one day. Elizabeth glanced up at her mother and clapped her small hands as though she was signaling her readiness for any challenge that might come her way. Through the windows of the foundation, the sun was descending over the Manhattan skyline. It bathed the entire city in a warm, golden glow. At that very second, Sarah sensed the presence of every Wellington woman who had lived before her and all those who were yet to come. They were all constructing something together, an enduring legacy that would exist long after they were all gone, a force that would truly change the world. 2 years after Richard's conviction, Sarah believed the worst chapters were closed. The Elizabeth Wellington Initiative was flourishing. Her daughter was growing up healthy and cheerful, and she had discovered her purpose within the family foundation. However, legal fights with narcissistic abusers are rarely simple, and Richard Mitchell was, if anything, relentlessly persistent. Sarah, we must have a word. James's tone was heavy as he walked into her office at the Foundation's headquarters in Manhattan. Richard's legal team has submitted an appeal. Sarah lifted her head from the financial statement she was examining, her pulse instantly quickening. What is the basis for the appeal? They are arguing that his conviction rested on fabricated evidence. They are demanding a completely new trial and are also filing for emergency custody while awaiting the decision. Emergency custody? Sarah's voice shot up with such alarm that 2-year-old Elizabeth glanced up from her coloring with a worried look. But he is in prison, not any longer. The look on James's face was grimmer than any Sarah had seen before. He was let out on bail while the appeal is pending. The judge decided he was not a flight risk due to his strong business connections in the area. Sarah was hit with that old familiar wave of chilling fear she had thought was gone forever. When did this happen? 3 days ago. 3 days? Why was I not told? We have been working non-stop to fortify our legal strategy before breaking the news to you. Sarah, there is something else. Richard's attorneys are now asserting that your testimony was coerced. And they are also claiming the Wellington family improperly influenced the first investigation. Margaret came into the office, accompanied by their head lawyer, Jonathan Blake, who had been the family's counsel for more than 20 years. His face was serious, yet he projected an air of confidence. Mrs. Mitchell, Jonathan began, I need you to understand that Richard's legal counsel is just making desperate moves. The case against him is absolutely solid, and these new accusations are just a last-ditch effort to plant a seed of doubt. But what if they succeed? Sarah asked. What if they persuade a jury that I was manipulated to testify against him? That is not going to happen, Margaret stated with absolute conviction. We have years of documented evidence, financial statements that cannot be altered, and statements from the families of his other victims. And what about Elizabeth? Is it possible for him to get custody? Jonathan shook his head. A temporary custody order can only be granted if there is proof a child is in imminent danger, while with their current caretaker. You are a model parent with more than enough resources to ensure Elizabeth's every need is met. A judge would never take her away from you based on such baseless accusations. Even with their words of support, Sarah lived in a state of high alert for the entire next week. She bolstered security around the property, cut back on her public events, and caught herself repeatedly checking the locks on doors that had gone unsecured for many months. Elizabeth could feel her mother's anxiety and became very attached, not wanting to play by herself and waking up from bad dreams and tears. "Mama scared?" Elizabeth asked one morning. Her words still few, but her emotional perception already very sharp. "Mama is just being very careful, my dear," Sarah answered, scooping her daughter onto her lap. "But we are perfectly safe. We are surrounded by many people who love us and keep us safe." The phone call arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when Sarah was in the middle of a foundation board meeting. Margaret took the call, listened for a second, and her face lost all its color. "That was a call from courthouse security," Margaret said to everyone in the room. "Richard Mitchell has just submitted an emergency request for the immediate custody of Elizabeth. His claim is that Sarah has become mentally unstable as a result of her newfound wealth and that the child is being raised in a setting that is harmful to her well-being." Sarah's hands started to tremble. "Can he actually do that? He can file any motion he wants," Jonathan responded, already packing his briefcase. "Actually, winning it is an entirely different story. We have to leave for the courthouse right now." The urgent hearing took place later that same day. Sarah sat inside the courtroom with Elizabeth in her arms. The little girl had been adamant about taking her favorite stuffed elephant to what she assumed was just another tedious meeting for adults. Richard's attorney, a woman with sharp features named Victoria Steinberg, laid out their argument with a kind of smooth hostility that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Your Honor, my client asserts that Sarah Mitchell has suffered a mental breakdown since she learned of her inheritance. She has gone from a simple, middle-class existence to a state of believing she is owed billions of dollars. This fantasy has caused her to level false charges against an accomplished businessman who has only ever been a loving husband and father." "Objection," Jonathan Blake said, as he rose to his feet. Mrs. Mitchell's inheritance is fully documented and has been confirmed. She is not suffering from a delusion. She is, in fact, one of the richest women in America. Judge Harrison, a pragmatic woman in her 60s, looked at her with disbelief. Miss Steinberg, are you truly trying to say that finding out you are an heiress is a form of mental illness? Your Honor, I am saying that this abrupt change in lifestyle, along with pressure from family members with a vested financial interest, has impaired Mrs. Mitchell's judgment. It affects her ability to act in the best interests of her child. Sarah felt a surge of anger. Richard was using the same manipulative games from their marriage, but this time in a courtroom, to take her daughter away. Steinberg pressed on. Furthermore, Mr. Mitchell has grounds to believe his wife is being cut off from friends and outside advice. She is surrounded only by those who gain from her continued reliance on the Wellington family fortune. Your Honor, Jonathan Blake countered, if we are discussing isolation and reliance, then we should look at Mr. Mitchell's own actions during the marriage. He methodically isolated Mrs. Mitchell from her friends, controlled all her finances, and made her think she depended on him for everything. All the while, he was secretly taking millions from her trust fund. Judge Harrison looked over at Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, I would like to hear from you. What is your response to these claims about your mental condition and your fitness as a mother? Sarah stood up, holding Elizabeth on her hip. She looked at the judge who held their future in her hands. Your Honor, 2 years ago, my entire life was a lie. I was married to a man who made me believe I was worthless, weak, and totally dependent on him. Now, I have discovered a family that loves me, the means to secure my daughter's future, and the power to help other women get away from the very abuse I went through. She stared right at Richard, who sat at the defendant's table, wearing a look of false concern she now saw was just calculated deception. If discovering my own strength makes me mentally unstable, then I will wear that label for the rest of my life. The only other choice is to return to being that frightened, lonely woman who lets someone else decide her value. Judge Harrison observed Sarah for a long moment. Mrs. Mitchell, please describe your current living arrangements and your support network. I reside at the Wellington family estate with my Uncle James, my cousins David and Margaret, and a dedicated staff that assists with Elizabeth's care while I am working. My daughter has her own pediatrician, an educational specialist, and more caring family than any child could ever hope for. And what about your work at the foundation? I manage a program that has assisted over 10,000 women in leaving abusive situations and starting new lives. This work gives my own life purpose, and it gives Elizabeth a legacy to be proud of. At that exact moment, Elizabeth declared loudly, "Mama, help people." A ripple of soft laughter went through the courtroom, and even Judge Harrison cracked a smile. Miss Steinberg, the judge said, addressing Richard's lawyer, what proof can you offer that Mr. Mitchell would create a better environment for this child than the one Mrs. Mitchell just outlined? Your Honor, Mr. Mitchell is a successful chief executive officer with a steady income, and a steady income that came from stealing from his wife's trust fund. Alleged stealing, Your Honor. Those charges are still being appealed. The financial statements are not under appeal, Miss Steinberg. The records show very clearly that Mr. Mitchell moved millions of dollars from accounts owned by his wife without her knowledge or permission. Judge Harrison reviewed her notes for several minutes as the courtroom sat in a tense stillness. Elizabeth played with her stuffed elephant, quietly chattering to herself about Mama's work and Uncle James. At last, the judge began to speak. The motion for emergency custody is denied, Mr. Mitchell. The information presented here indicates you are not trying to get custody for your daughter's well-being. Instead, You are using it as a way to keep control over your ex-wife and her money. Richard started to get up from his chair. Your Honor, that is not— Sit down, Mr. Mitchell. In addition, I am ordering you to stay at least 500 feet away from Mrs. Mitchell and the child at all times. Any breach of this order will lead to your immediate arrest. As they walked out of the courthouse, Sarah felt a burden she did not even know she was carrying finally lift from her shoulders. Richard's desperate legal attacks had all failed. She was at last completely free. Mama happy? Elizabeth asked as they headed toward their car. Yes, my sweet girl. Mama is very happy. That night, Sarah sat in her mother's former room at the estate. She held Elizabeth in her arms as the little girl fell asleep. Out the windows, she could see the glowing lights of the Foundation's research center. Inside, teams of scientists were developing projects that would help millions of people. She recalled the terrified pregnant woman who was shoved in a bank lobby 3 years earlier, and she smiled. That woman had found her people. That woman had found her power. That woman had made a difference in the world, and she was only getting started. 5 years after the court victory that guaranteed Elizabeth's safety, Sarah once again stood before the Wellington Foundation's board of directors. This time, however, she was not just proposing a new project. She was being officially named the Foundation's youngest ever chairwoman. Ladies and gentlemen, James announced to the full boardroom, I am so proud to introduce our new chairwoman, Sarah Wellington Mitchell. The room erupted in thunderous applause. Elizabeth, who was now 7 years old and sitting in the front row with her Uncle James, clapped her hands with great excitement and shouted, That is my mama! More laughter filled the room. It was the kind of warm, real joy that made Sarah's heart overflow with thanks for the family she had found and the life she had created. Thank you, Sarah said. Her voice was strong and assured in a way that would have been unimaginable to the scared woman she used to be. 5 years ago, I was convinced I knew who I was. I was mistaken about nearly everything. She advanced to the first slide of her presentation. It displayed a photo of the very first Elizabeth Wellington Initiative office, which was just one room with 2 desks and a telephone. Today, the Elizabeth Wellington Initiative is active in 47 states and 12 countries. We have supported over 50,000 women in escaping abusive partners and rebuilding their lives. But that is only the start of what we can achieve when we work together. Sarah scanned the room, looking at the faces of people who had become her family. They were board members who accepted her not merely as an heiress, but as a collaborator in their shared goal to change the world. I want to share my vision for the next chapter of our work, the Elizabeth Wellington Global Education Initiative. She moved to the next slide. It showed statistics on women's education around the globe that caused several board members to lean forward, their interest captured. At this very moment, more than 130 million girls across the world are refused an education for the simple reason that they are female. They are blocked from school by poverty, by cultural traditions, and by families who fail to recognize the importance of educating their daughters. Elizabeth Wellington, sitting right in the front row, put up her small hand. Mama, may I ask a question? Sarah smiled, delighted by her daughter's inquisitiveness. Of course, sweetheart. Why do people not want girls to learn things? That is the most important question, Elizabeth, and that is precisely why we have to make a change. Sarah addressed the board again. We possess the funds to create complete educational programs that do more than just place girls into classrooms. We can tackle the fundamental problems that keep them away from school. This includes poverty assistance for their families, local programs on the benefits of educating girls, and financial opportunities for women that show the real power of education. A board member, Dr. Patricia Chen, gave an approving nod. What sort of figures are we considering for this? $5 billion over 10 years. That is enough to support full educational programs for over 2 million girls worldwide. A murmur of excitement went through the room. This was a bold plan, even for the Wellington Foundation. But this is what sets our plan apart from other education projects, Sarah went on. Every single girl we educate grows up to be a champion for the next generation. We are not simply building schools, we are building a worldwide network of educated women who will stand up for their own daughters, their local towns, and their nations. Margaret Wellington raised her hand. Sarah, this is the exact type of transformative vision that your mother would have championed in this work. How will we track our success? We will track it across generations, Sarah answered. When a girl attends school, her own future children are 6 times more likely to get an education. When women are given economic chances, rates of domestic violence fall significantly. When mothers are educated, infant death rates drop steeply. We are not just transforming single lives, we are altering the course of whole societies. The board passed the initiative with a unanimous vote. After the meeting concluded, Sarah strolled through the foundation's corridors with Elizabeth, who was determined to stop and look at every photograph and award hanging on the walls. Mom, is that great-grandma Elizabeth in those photos? Elizabeth asked, her small finger tapping on the glass of a wall filled with family pictures. Some of them are, Sarah replied, crouching to see the world from her daughter's view. Do you want me to show you my favorite? They moved toward a portrait in the main hall, showing Elizabeth Wellington Mitchell on her college graduation day, her smile filled with hope and dreams. She has your eyes, Mommy. People say you have her smile. Will I grow up to help people just like you and great-grandma Elizabeth? Sarah wrapped her daughter in a tight hug, smelling her sweet shampoo and feeling overwhelmed by the love for this little girl. You can be absolutely anything you want to be, my love. I want to be like you. I want to help people. And you will, Sarah promised. But the first step is to learn as much as you can. That means staying curious about everything and always being kind to people, Sarah explained. Can you promise me that? Yes, Mommy. As they left, their path took them past the Foundation's high-tech research labs, where scientists were tackling problems that affected millions. They went by the Education Center, where students on scholarships were studying for careers that would pull their families from poverty. They also passed the Crisis Intervention Center, where counselors were guiding women away from terrible situations and toward fresh starts. Your great-grandmother made all this happen, Sarah said quietly, as the elevator descended to the parking garage. She taught us that having money means nothing if you do not do something good with it. She said that being lucky enough to have a lot comes with a duty to others. What is a duty, Mommy? It is when you have the chance to make things better for someone, so you do it. Not because you are forced to, but because it is the right thing to do. Later that night, Sarah was tucking Elizabeth into bed. It was the very same room her own mother had slept in as a girl. The room was now decorated in bright, happy colors, with furniture just the right size for a child. But it still felt like a place where a brilliant woman had once dreamed of changing the world. Mommy, can you tell me the story? Elizabeth whispered, a nightly request. The one about the afraid lady at the bank. It was their special ritual, the tale of how Sarah found her real family and her own inner strength. Elizabeth loved hearing about the exact moment her mom stopped being afraid and started being powerful. Once upon a time, Sarah began, her voice soft as she settled into the rocking chair next to the bed, there was a woman who was convinced she was nobody important. She was with a man who constantly told her she was weak and had no value. And for a long time, she believed him. But she was not weak, Elizabeth chimed in, right on cue. No, she was not, Sarah smiled. She just had not realized it yet. Then one day, this woman went to a bank to ask about some money, and her husband became furious. He actually pushed her. He did, Elizabeth confirmed. But a very kind man working at the bank saw everything, and he noticed something special about the woman. He realized she was part of a family that had been searching for her for a very, very long time. A family with tons of money, Elizabeth added. A family with tons of love, Sarah gently corrected. The money was just the tool they used to do good things. The family itself was the real treasure. What happened next? Well, the woman discovered she was not weak at all. She found out she came from a long history of very strong women. These women had always used what they had to make the world a better place. She learned she could give a helping hand to other women who felt scared, just like she once had. And then she had a wonderful baby girl. She did, Sarah agreed, and that little girl grew up feeling completely loved and knowing she was strong. She knew she could achieve anything she put her mind to. A big yawn escaped Elizabeth as she burrowed deeper under her covers. Mommy, when I am big, I want to help the scared ladies too. I know you will, sweetie, Sarah whispered. I have a feeling you are going to help so many people. As Elizabeth drifted into sleep, Sarah stayed in the rocking chair, her eyes scanning the room where her own mother had dreamed. On the bedside table was a photo frame holding pictures of 4 generations of Wellington women: her great-grandmother, her grandmother, her mother, herself, and little Elizabeth. They were powerful women who created something that would last. Women who had used their good fortune to build opportunities for people who had none. They were women who knew that real wealth is not counted in dollars, but in the number of lives you improve and the positive changes you bring about. Through the window, the estate grounds were dark, but Sarah could see the distant lights of the foundation's buildings. Tomorrow, those buildings would be bustling with people dedicated to solving problems and creating new possibilities. Teachers would be training to work in remote villages. Scientists would be inventing new ways to bring clean water to communities. Counselors would be getting ready to help women flee from harm. And it was all paid for by a family who understood the responsibility of their privilege and the deep satisfaction of having a purpose. Sarah's mind briefly turned to Richard, who is currently serving a 15-year prison sentence for financial crimes and domestic violence. She almost never thought of him now, except to feel a strange sense of gratitude. His cruel and controlling abuse had unintentionally pushed her toward finding her true identity and her life's mission. She pictured the frightened, pregnant woman who had been shoved in a bank lobby 7 years ago, and a small smile touched her lips. That woman found her family. That woman found her courage. That woman went on to change the world. Getting up from the rocking chair, Sarah leaned over and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Sweet dreams, Elizabeth," she whispered. "Tomorrow, we have more of the world to change." As she switched off the light and gently closed the door, Sarah felt the comforting presence of all the Wellington women who came before her, and the bright promise of those who would follow. They were all building something together, something that would endure long after they were gone, something that would transform the world, one person at a time, for many generations. Beyond the window, the stars sparkled over the Wellington estate. They seemed to watch over a legacy of kindness, resilience, and service that would endure as long as people needed help, and there were brave women to offer it. The Elizabeth Wellington Initiative had started with a single scared woman's vow to help others. It had since blossomed into a global powerhouse for positive change, and it was just getting started. In meeting rooms and classrooms across the globe, women were finding their own strength, recognizing their own value, and unleashing their own power to improve not just their own situations, but the lives of countless others. The frightened woman in the bank was now the head of a movement. The powerless victim had become a true agent of change. The lonely wife was now the respected head of a family committed to lifting others. And in a cozy bedroom in the Hudson Valley, a 7-year-old girl was sleeping soundly, dreaming about the day she too would carry that torch. She dreamed of continuing to build the world her great-grandmother had imagined. It was a world where every single woman understood her value, embraced her power, and used her strength to help other women do the same. The foundation they had created together would stand the test of time. The lives they had transformed would cause ripple effects, touching millions more. The legacy of love, bravery, and purpose would go on as long as there were people who understood that money without empathy is empty, but money paired with love could change absolutely everything. That was the Wellington way. That was the power of women empowering other women. This is what unfolds when someone finally realizes that their greatest asset is not what they can accumulate for themselves, but what they can give to the world. And it all began with a single push, a single act of cruelty that uncovered a truth too big to be kept hidden. Every so often, the most terrible thing that happens in your life is the very thing that sets you on the path to doing the greatest thing you will ever do. Sarah Elizabeth Wellington Mitchell had discovered her family. She had claimed her birthright, and she had built a legacy that would stand long after she was gone. But the most important thing she learned was how to help other people discover their own strength, their own value, and their own power to make the world a better place. And that, she knew, was a treasure far more valuable than all the money on earth. This story reminds us of a powerful truth. Your circumstances do not define your destiny. The woman who was pushed in that bank lobby became the leader of a movement that saved 50,000 women from abuse. Every woman who feels trapped right now, every person who has been told they are worthless, you have power you haven't discovered yet. Sometimes it takes losing everything to find out who you really are. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button. If you know someone who needs to hear this message, share it with them. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever discovered strength you didn't know you had? And if you haven't subscribed yet, join our family so you never miss another story that could change your perspective. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and inspiration. Thank you for being part of our community.